Legalize pot or not, it's everyone's favorite debate. Next.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Yeah, so you thought the legislature only had to deal with truck tolls this legislative season, right? No, in fact, these kinds of debates may or may not get to the floor. That's going to be part of the interesting process of the politics of our state house this particular season. But there's plenty more to be debated, that including the legislation on bringing marijuana to a dispensary near you. Now I think a lot of people are still confused as to what we're doing now, what the neighbor states are doing, what the federal government's doing, and it's really kind of a mixed bag, and we've got some terrific guests tonight to explain it all to you. But first, let's start with this particular story, which is a different twist on how to handle doing some retail marijuana business.
There's plenty of green to go around at the Harborside Health Center in Oakland, and there's even more of it, and it's safe. Because the industry is legal in the state, but not federally, Harborside can't use banks or credit cards for anything, including paying taxes.
It's absurd. It's dangerous. It is not in the interest of public safety.
And it's become a major issue. Marijuana is a taxable industry in the state. That's 1,600 dispensaries, bring in close to $570 million of taxable income each year. But the problem is, when they bring it in, we mean bring it in by hand.
We have to take duffel bags from our San Jose location filled with cash to the IRS.
Which means someone is responsible for carrying those to the unsecured office because armored cars aren't acceptable either. And while Harborside takes every precaution to ensure its tax-paying employees' safety, there's no guarantee.
That's pretty dangerous to carry duffel bags with hundreds of thousands of dollars in it anywhere, let alone in a big urban city like San Jose.
Dispensaries want a better option, and so do many on the Board of Equalization, the branch in charge of taxing dispensaries. It says only about a third of dispensaries adhere to tax laws, and with a better system of payment, the state would cash in on millions of dollars left on the table by bad reporting. This year, it is expected to bring in the highest revenues yet, and the risks, Andrew worries, will rise with it.
It's extremely unsafe for our staff, and it's something that I lose a lot of sleep over, quite honestly.
So how about that one? Did you ever think of that one, Jared?
Yeah, it's an issue that's been coming up for a while. Colorado has been looking at it very seriously, and it's part of the reason why Congress is now looking at the issue, because states like Colorado and Washington sort of pushed the envelope. Now there's finally conversations in Washington about what to do with this. I don't think it serves anyone's interest to have these businesses operating on a cash basis. Here in Rhode Island, it seems like the...
Hold on. I was just looking for a short answer. You are mojo, man. You are ready to go. Jared's been here before, advocates for legalization of marijuana. Professor Horwitz has been here before, and I was completely surprised that you showed up for this show. I'm thinking, what's a busy professor like you doing in a lowly place like this, talking about smoking dope for retail? I'm thinking, by the end of the week, I'm kind of punchy anyway. Yeah. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you.
And you too. So hold your horses for a second, will you? No, but I thought I'd surprise him with that video. He's got all the answers. You were reacting as you saw it. What was your gut check on that?
Well, what I was curious about is whether there have been robberies. That's obviously a very serious concern when we force a legitimate business, into doing cash business. That's a mistake, and I'm glad Jared is talking about the fact that the federal government is looking into resolving it.
Yeah, well, I think, though, that there's a cart before the horse problem there, clearly. And without some kind of federal guidance on this whole thing, every state, including Rhode Island, that may move, and Massachusetts, of course, that moves to the deregulation and/or legalization of marijuana is going to have to face this safety crisis, for heaven's sakes, and cash management crisis, right?
Hopefully the states are going to lead the federal government into some sensible policies, right? Our criminal prohibition of marijuana is not a sensible policy, hasn't ever been a sensible policy. Maybe the states will lead, and the federal government will follow.
Yeah.
All right. So, go ahead.
Well, just real quick, it hasn't been a major issue in Colorado. It obviously is not ideal, but it hasn't been a major issue in Colorado.
Well, why? Because they had better armored cars? Why?
Yeah,
I mean,
the security at these places is very high, and because of this reason, but also for other reasons. And so this is something that we haven't seen get out of control in other states. So I don't think it's a reason to not move forward. I think we need Congress to move on this, but it hasn't been a terrible situation in other states.
well, what is the difference then, if you know more about this, between Colorado and California and what they're doing?
Well, so I'm not sure. I'm not very familiar with what California's system looks like.
It seems like the
that-
California state government's not taking records on taxation because the federal government precludes it from happening, and so anything that's regulated by the feds, which is banking law and the like, they don't want to step in the middle of it. What's Colorado doing? Running a renegade state taxation operation, or what?
So in California, they do have more of a disjointed system where county by county regulates these dispensaries, whereas in Colorado, there's a marijuana enforcement division over the whole state. What the federal government under President Obama has basically said is, we're going to let states do their thing, and we're not going to interfere. We're going to watch what goes on, even though it's technically federally illegal. We're going to let it go on. And so what's been going on in Colorado is sort of an experiment. And the federal government, I think, has been watching and has been hearing about this issue. And there is actually a bill in Congress in both chambers to solve this problem.
All right. You got involved in this, how and why?
I got involved as a student because I saw the war on drugs as a really problematic social justice issue. I saw that primarily communities of color were being arrested, their families were being separated because of this. We saw especially low-income communities were being targeted by these laws, and it struck me as profoundly unjust. And I wanted to get involved and do something because it seemed like this is an opportunity where I can make a difference. There's support from Republicans, there's support from Democrats, liberal, conservative, and I saw this as a way for me to get involved in politics in a way to bring people together around a common sense solution.
All right. So, and I asked that. That's not the first time I've asked and had the question answered by Jared. It's a really, really articulate answer from a pretty smart young guy. What people are thinking when they're watching the show is, hey, there's a young guy, he smokes a lot of dope, he just wants it to be legal, right?
No, see, that's, and I deal with that all the time. I mean,
Right, of course
folks,
you do. Of
folks
course.
think that that's why I'm involved in this, and it's because we have a policy that doesn't work, and when something's broken, it needs to be fixed.
I mean, even the jokes amongst the crew that I participated in before you showed up today, I didn't even know you were coming, and that really kind of, the credibility went up. But we were joking about, yeah, this guy's going to come in. They're late. You were a few minutes late. Yeah, they're going to come in all boned. They're all, and that's part of the thing that you've got to deal with in trying to make your really, really cohesive arguments, and not have to, but still have to deal with the.
Right. Well, that's becoming less and less. Right? The giggle factor has been decreasing for as long as I've been doing this, and I think that's why we have people like Professor Horwitz here, because he sees this as not about people trying to get high. It's about ending a policy that's done damage and fixing, again, a problem that needs to be fixed.
And we shall let the professor opine on that when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back in. You know what those are. Is that expensive to grow, by the way? I mean.
It's pretty sophisticated. It's not like throwing some seeds in the soil and just letting it grow up. There's some equipment involved. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why it needs to be regulated.
Jared is for the regulation of marijuana. He directs Regulate Rhode Island, and Professor Horwitz is a co-chair. And I don't know why I find myself surprised. Why do I find myself surprised? Examine me.
I think the reason you find yourself surprised connects to what you said just before the break, which is the expectation that people who are in favor of decriminalization and regulation and treating marijuana like a social health issue will be young potheads who want to smoke pot. And I guess, thankfully, that's not your perception of who I am correctly.
No.
None of those things, unfortunately, in terms of the young part. What I see, I've been a practicing criminal defense lawyer for 30 years. What I've seen is the war on drugs, and in particular, the war on marijuana, having a devastating impact on low-income communities, and most particularly communities of color. Our enforcement of the marijuana laws, all of our drug laws, is extraordinarily discriminatory. A rich, young, white person who winds up arrested and charged with some kind of drug possession is almost certainly going to find a path to having that completely removed from their criminal history. the same person who happens to have dark skin or happens to be low income is almost certainly winding up in prison.
No,
There's nothing fair or right about that.
And I would agree wholeheartedly, but my gut check on that would be, well, we should fix the criminal justice system's inequities rather than legalize the act that brought black or white person there.
Well, so the next question you ask, I understand that point, although I think that's a pipe dream. I think we can make some incremental changes in our criminal
I don't
justice
think I
system,
broke
but-
the bank with a new thought. You've been
Right.
through this debate before.
Yes.
But that would be my initial say, okay, listen, if the system is unfair between white, black, majority, minority, socioeconomic differences, all that, and we can certainly show more than 1 million case studies that it
Yes.
is, why aren't we fixing the system rather than regulating the act or
Well,
legalizing the act that brings it there?
Because the other piece of the puzzle for me is the basic question of whether smoking marijuana should be a crime. We live in a society where smoking cigarettes is not a crime, where drinking alcohol is not a crime, we're doing lots of things that are harmful to one's health are not criminalized. And you have to try and figure out what's the benefit to criminalizing something. And I think what some of the opponents of this legislation will say is we need to criminalize marijuana to keep it out of the hands of our children. Except that it doesn't. It's an incredible, miserable failure. And if you look at the way we regulate alcohol and you look at the way we regulate cigarettes, we're doing a much, much better job of keeping alcohol and cigarettes away from our kids than marijuana. You ask any high school kid in the state of Rhode Island, or probably anywhere in the country, what's the easiest substance for you to get a hold of? Marijuana, cigarettes, or alcohol? They're all going to tell you marijuana, right? We have just failed terribly at the enterprise of keeping marijuana away from our kids. And I think it's really important to keep marijuana away from our kids.
Do you think if we regulate, legalize, we'll keep marijuana away from our kids?
I don't think it's a panacea. I mean, kids clearly have access to alcohol. I mean, they can ask an older sibling to buy it for them. I think the big point here is that if we keep it in an illegal market, which is what prohibition creates, we learned this lesson with alcohol prohibition. If you make it illegal, you're not going to get rid of it. You're going to put it in the hands of criminals that sell it. And I think that's where the health and safety of kids really is an important point, because we've got dealers who don't check IDs. They have no qualms selling marijuana to kids. They have no qualms offering them other drugs. So we've empowered this illicit economy around marijuana, and I think that's what regulation solves. Regulation says, look, we don't have a choice of whether we want marijuana in society or not, because we've tried to prohibit it, we've tried to punish people for having it, and it's failed miserably, as Professor Horwitz said. So how do we get rid of that unregulated, out-of-control market that criminals currently profit from? The only way to beat them is to create a legal alternative, and by creating that, you put more controls on when it's sold, to whom it's sold, where it's sold, and that at least provides some accountability.
Have we run out of the legitimacy of the argument to get it where it's made, that the war on drugs has never really been executed from the places where it's generally made and shipped, in the places, Colombia or Mexico or wherever the heck else the predominant smuggled material comes from? Are we done with that because we don't want to do that either? I don't know.
Well, it's certainly never succeeded,
Right.
and I don't see
But I
any
don't
basis for believing it ever could succeed.
I don't think we ever put the effort in to actually see if it was. It may be that America has gone past the point where they're actually even thinking we should do that and try that.
We did try that. We tried that there's Plan Colombia. I mean, the recent
It wasn't
cartel
sustained, though. It has not been a sustained effort.
We've sustained it for many years. The Mexican government in 2006, with the help of the United States government in terms of financial support, invested billions of dollars into fighting drug cartels. And it's sort of like the Hydra problem. They took down a couple of big leaders, but all that did was create a void that new cartels came up and rose to take power. And now you've seen that even after the ramp up of that 2006 expansion of the drug war, the violence has only increased. The homicide numbers have increased since that. So what we've seen is, again, like the Hydra problem, the more we try to fight violence with violence. We just produce more violence and instability. So we have tried to address that supply side, and that's been the real approach of the drug war, is let's attack the supply, and that hasn't worked. And I think what you're seeing a shift in the whole country is to say, look, if we want to look at substance use as a public health issue, we have to look at the demand side. We have to provide treatment to those who need it. This is what we're doing with opiates. I mean, we're not saying let's crack down on the people who use it. Let's meet the folks who have a problem and provide the resources that they need. And this represents a similar approach. We're not going to use a hammer to get rid of the supply. It's going to be there. There's going to be a black market. But at least we can control it. At least we can regulate it and hold the folks that make it accountable.
Honestly, I'm not comfortable with it, but I've lost my energy debating it. and I bet you most of my audience is with me on this, and we'll talk about that and what the actual proposal for this legislative session is. Stay with us. So Jared and Andrew are here trying to regulate Rhode Island. They are chairs and co-chairs of this, director and co-chair of this. When I said at the break about losing my steam for arguing this, is that it's just true. And you said something during the break, Professor, that I think is important. I have to admit that in my daily travels, not that I haven't been in the city, and not that I haven't covered the courts, and not that I haven't seen injustice in front of me and on television, but I don't see it every day. Right. And you say you see it every day.
I do. I see the young people who can't get jobs, who don't qualify for federal financial aid for higher education because of a marijuana conviction. People who have struggles getting into housing.
And I know plenty of kids. I know plenty of kids that I grew up with in high school. I never smoked pot in high school. I never smoked pot in high school. Got that? And they're CEOs and successful lawyers, right. And because they either didn't have to answer to it criminally or beat a charge. And right. If we're going to be intellectually honest about it, honestly, even though some of you are steaming on the other end of the television, that's just true. Yeah. Right? So what do we want to do here? What kind of a bill are we looking at? Already we've got a medicinal legalization issue. By the way, the governor tried to slap with her proposal. She slapped a boom fee on the growth of that. You guys fighting that one tooth and nail?
Well, we're saying why tax sick patients who need this as a medicine when there's a huge base of recreational users that don't pay any taxes, because of prohibition.
Yeah, that one kind of struck me. I will tell you a quick off story. So a friend of mine who I play a lot of golf with, who's got a little back issue, says, hey, you know what? I figured out I'm going to get some of that medicinal marijuana that you can literally rub. And all he needs is to get his doctor to write a pass, and he can buy it legally that way. And we've been kind of kidding around with him that, he's developed a golf pothead. But the point of the matter is that if you view it as pure medicine, every medicine comes from some source somewhere, right, whether it be grown or manufactured chemically, right? Mm-hmm. I think you got to kind of let up on the prejudices and right, the ideas that we have that way. But so the medicinal marijuana people are getting whacked here. You guys are working hard at knocking down that item? Yeah,
we think that that's not a sensible way to go to extract revenue from those folks. And we think a more sensible approach is to tax the folks who use it recreationally. People who aren't using it because they need it to ease their suffering or ease their pain. They're using it for fun. And, we want to not only tax them, but again, we want to shut down this illicit market.
What do you think the governor's motive was?
Well, I think she wants to create revenue, and I think that this seemed like a place to get it. I think that it would have been worth thinking more about the legislation to again look at recreation.
We've had a few spotty instances where people who were allegedly using this for the right purposes have sold and trafficked and all that kind of thing. I guess, though, that with every system you're going to have, it's not fail-proof, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. So what do you want to do? What does this bill call for?
So it calls for regulating marijuana similarly to alcohol. So we want to set up a system where there are licenses for cultivators, the people who actually produce it, licenses for the retailers who can sell it to adults 21 and older, and then licenses for labs that test it, so to tell folks what's in it.
This is homegrown dope, is what we're talking about here.
It's grown owned by a licensed producer who's subject to a lot of regulations, security, but also quality control. There's all sorts of regulations that we see in other states that have done this.
What
very
happens
strict.
to the marijuana that gets shipped in illegally now? Where do you think that goes?
Well, it goes to the illicit market, and I think
And it remains there. So you're suggesting that what the product flow right now,
Yeah.
which is black market, illegal,
right.
will dissipate on its own when
Right.
growing it here becomes an option
Yeah, I
for
mean-
legally and licensed growers, dealers,
Right.
retailers.
So just like alcohol prohibition, once we ended alcohol prohibition, it didn't happen overnight, but slowly all the consumers started going to the regulated stores where
is the pricing regulated?
the pricing is going to be taxed. So there's not a specific price limit, but the tax policy is there to sort of keep a cushion from keeping it from crashing too low, and also it's going to have to be altered over time to keep it from going.
What's the pricing issue? I would have no idea if I wanted it. In the old days, we called it a dime bag. A dime bag was $10. Duh, a dime. And now I'm told a dime bag is worth 50. I have no idea what it costs right now. But on a retail basis, are we talking about competitive, higher, cheaper? What?
Well, again, there's sort of a sweet spot because you want it to be, low enough to beat the illicit market. You need it to be, competitive with the illicit market so that you put those dealers out of business. But it needs to be high enough so that it's not super cheap because we know that can influence, youth use. So there's kind of a sweet spot there. But again, it's similar to alcohol. I mean, you have different levels of, depending on potency, depending on, what type it is. Those things influence the
Do we have
price.
enough protections already in the laws for intoxication, for driving while under the influence? Or do we have to, I was going to say bone up on, but I mean, do we have to, come on, Danny. Do we have to rewrite a bunch of legislation in addition to this to tighten it up?
No, I don't think so. I mean, driving under the influence of marijuana is already a crime.
Right.
We already prosecute those cases. They are not easy cases to prosecute. They aren't now. They won't be if this law changes. But there's a premise built into that somehow by legalizing and regulating marijuana, that marijuana use is going to sort of skyrocket in some way. There's simply no evidence to suggest that. The states that have gone down this road, look, most people who want to smoke marijuana are smoking marijuana. It's not that hard to find.
From a legal basis, I don't have a minute. I could talk to you guys all day, but it's fascinating. Businesses that drug test and worry about this kind of thing, will they have less legal footing to do so with the legalization of marijuana?
Well, marijuana has always been very troubling in terms of that kind of drug testing because it stays in your system for an inordinately long time. So you can have employees who are testing positive for marijuana based on the fact that they used marijuana 3 days a month ago, and it has absolutely no impact on their employment situation. So will that scenario change? Perhaps, but in my view, it would change for the better. What I'm worried about as an employer is an employee who's actually under the influence while they're at the work site, not something that's detectable in their blood.
All right. What's your projection? You confident that you're going to get this on the floor?
We're really optimistic because Massachusetts is going to have this on the ballot in November, and the fact is, if we don't move on this year, folks are going to cross the border. Massachusetts is going to collect all that tax revenue, and we're going to miss out. So I think that in terms of the economic benefits, which is certainly not the primary reason to do this, but it is a reason to do it sooner rather than
Well,
later.
let me tell you something. We're looking for new revenue streams. There's no doubt about that. Quick number, do you have a projection of what kind of tax revenue we could see year one, year two?
Back of the napkin estimate is about $58 million a year.
Well, actually, ballpark, off the top of my head, seems to reflect the kind of money we're worried about losing to the casinos in Massachusetts once they're up and running.
Right.
So come back when this thing gets heated up,
Yeah,
please.
absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Good to
Thank
see
you.
you. Final word and we come back. Stay with us. It's a fascinating conversation, legalizing marijuana. If there are opponents out there, let us know. Just talking to my fellas here, can't find any. So what does that tell you? So if you're out there, you're invited. Have a great weekend. Good night.